Ladies and gentlemen, bună dimineața, good morning. Thank you for being here. Rebuilding Ukraine is probably one of the most important issues we have to discuss after we will get a great success for a ceasefire and for the peace plan and agreement between Ukraine and Russia. United States and European Union will play a vital role in order to get this war ended. And I want to thank New Strategy Center and CEO George Scutaru for inviting me to moderate this panel. We have distinguished panelists, and of course, we will talk about the security perspective of 2026 and possible developments. And I will tell you a few words about our great panelists here today with me. Sorin Moldovan, he's a Deputy Defense Minister, and he's coordinating as State Secretary the Foreign Relation and Defense Policy Department of the Romanian MOD. Mr. Shigeo MUTSUSHIKA, he's Managing Director for the Kazankai Foundation and Chief Research Officer of the Kazankai Foundation. He's a Professor Emeritus at the University of Shizuoka. Thank you, Sorin Moldovan. Thank you, Shigeo MUTSUSHIKA. We'll have a surprise for them because Mr. MUTSUSHIKA is speaking a very good Romanian language, and his presentation will be in Romanian. Also, the presentation of the Deputy Defense Minister Moldovan. Then we will have, together with us, Mr. Paul COYER. He's a research professor and the Institute of the World Politics, United States. Paul COYER is a well-known strategic foreign affairs and security analyst. He's very well connected to the US administrations. He has a great experience in studying and analyzing defense, security, and foreign policy issues. Thank you for being here, Paul COYER. Nico LANGE is Senior Fellow of Munich Security Conference in Germany, our good friend, and it's so nice to see you again. And Vadym HALAICHUK is the first Deputy Chairperson of the Committee of the Ukraine Integration into European Union. Vadym, thank you so much for being here. So when I talk with George Scutaru, the CEO of the New Strategy Center, about this panel, we had some ideas about the concepts. And one of the most boring issues we should probably discuss 3 months ago or 6 months ago was the following. How will the relationship between the United States and the European allies evolve in 2026? And probably the most common answer will be, okay, for 76 years, good allies, good friends, nothing will happen, we'll have the same relations, and we'll be great allies. Right now, I think this question is probably one of the most provocative on our debate. We want peace in Ukraine, we want to rebuild Ukraine, but right now, I think we'll have a great issues of debate on the US and Europe relation that is somehow in a little bit of trouble right now. So, I will give the floor to Sorin Moldovan, Deputy Defense Minister. His presentation will be in Romanian. Minister.
Good morning. Distinguished participanți, doamnelor și domnilor.
Distinguished participants, Your Excellencies, good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to deliver this speech under the patronage of the Ukrainian government and the Romanian government about the reconstruction of Ukraine. This topic is a central one for the year 2026. I want to congratulate New Strategy Center and George Scutaru for their efforts to organize such an important event with remarkable experts and specialists because our Ukrainian friends have mid-term and long-term plans, but in the future we'll have numerous challenges on the eastern flank, and the war of aggression of Russia in Ukraine will continue to challenge Ukrainian security and European security. We need to better understand similarities and challenges for the Euro-Atlantic region and for the Pacific Atlantic region. However, the efforts need to be continued. We need to continue to support Ukraine and continue with the European commitment and Euro-Atlantic commitment for the support of Ukraine. Their needs for security and defense need to be met, and at global level in 2026, the strategic competition between great powers will continue, and that will put extra pressure on the international order that was rule-based until now. The evolutions in the Euro-Atlantic zone require a comprehensive understanding of global developments because they will have different consequences on our region. And the panels of discussion in your conference reflects that the alliances adaptation to this changed world imposes more resources, especially considering more resources dedicated by each and every ally, considering the conference in The Hague. The burdenship needs to be better understood, and we need to understand that there's a need for European allies to take over a more important role within NATO and share the burden to adapt to a world in continuous change, especially in the realm of security. European allies need to present an adequate answer to these new developments, because our security, our joint security, means better standard of living, and we should be in line with the European defense readiness until 2030. The pillars of European defense readiness will play an important role in shaping the EU strategic profile through the implementation of the SAFE financial instrument that gives us 150 billion euros for the remaining years until 2030. We are totally committed to boosting the defense expenses up to 5% of the GDP until 2035, as per the Hague Conference. So our capabilities for defense need to be our new focus. We should adopt new technologies for defense, and the war in Ukraine imposes that we need to strike a balance and be coherent at NATO level and EU level. We have security developments in our eastern neighborhood, but we will face new challenges also in the south because we need to have a 360-degree security approach, and the security art will continue to be a challenge because the rule-based world order is to be changed. And in this context, I think we should continue to work together within NATO, within the EU, and coordinate each other with our partners in order to boost societal resilience, manage the consequences, and approach the instability causes. We shall continue to face challenges that want to destabilize democratic societies through hybrid actions. Hybrid actions will continue to test our resilience, our determination, so we need to counteract them. We need to continue to learn from one another, to learn from our Ukrainian partners and Republic of Moldova how to tackle hybrid threats. We need to have adequate training in a multi-domain organizational framework, and we need to join our efforts for societal resilience. We have the national strategy for defense. We shall present the White Charter for Defense in the near future. And all these mean that we should involve non-governmental actors to boost awareness and readiness of our whole society. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to bring to your attention two more aspects. Security and defense need continuity, solidarity, unity, and NATO and EU. And we should not forget that we'll have a new security summit in Ankara next year that will be at least as interesting as the one in The Hague. And global actors will have an impact on the security framework in 2026. For example, we'll have elections in the US next year and parliamentary elections in Russia. And in the new regions, Donetsk, Lugansk, Kherson, we will have elections. So there will be interesting evolutions in terms of security there. So we should pay attention to these developments. We should act in a synchronized manner together with our partners within NATO and the EU, but also at local level. Thank you.
Moldovan for ladies and gentlemen, doamnelor și domnilor, profesorul Shigeo MUTSUSHIKA.
Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Shigeo MUTSUSHIKA was the first of the members of the panel who said he would like to present in Romanian. So it is indeed a pleasure to listen to Professor MUTSUSHIKA about what could happen in 2026 from a security perspective, considering also the objective of this forum, namely the reconstruction of Ukraine. Professor MUTSUSHIKA, you have the floor. Good morning. Thank you for your invitation to this conference. And it's a great honor for me to be here with you. I would like to talk about the concept of this panel, namely what are the geopolitical, the major geopolitical trends of today that could model European and global security until 2026. As anyone understands, the major issue that could change the current geopolitical situation is the relation between Trump and Russia and China. That is the business he wants to do with these countries. This strategy of Mr. Trump might have a strategic objective to disconnect Russia from China. However, I am concerned about the potential impact of this situation upon security in Europe and also in the Indo-Pacific region. The peace proposal of the United States for the war in Europe was strongly influenced by the ceasefire conditions imposed by Russia. And even the conciliation policy reminded us of the conference in Munich in 1938. The ceasefire proposal also included a clause whereby the US would be a mediator between NATO and Russia, rather than negotiating with Russia as a NATO member. Through this proposal, it's possible that the United States might want to have a superior position as compared to Russia and Europe, and they might have an influence upon Europe and Russia. However, this clearly demonstrates that the Atlantic Alliance is not a monolith. There were also issues with this alliance indicated by the conference in Munich this year. The conflict between democracy and authoritarianism promoted by the United States clearly indicated an ideological conflict with three parties between liberal democracies in Europe as well as the Russian authoritarian regime and the MAGA and MAGA. However, considering that the ideologies of MAGA and MAGA are closer to the Russian conservative ideology, I remain concerned about the impact of this three-party ideological conflict will have upon European security. Given the background of the agreement between the US and Russia and the problems with the Atlantic Alliance, Macron had organized a visit to Beijing to strengthen relationship with China. China is approached from two sides by US ones who wants to conclude a favorable trade agreement, and on the other hand by France, by Macron, who want to strengthen France-China relationship. They also take advantage of the their favorable condition, and they strengthen their tough and assertive attitude towards Japan. I'm speaking about China, in order to divide relations between Japan and the US, as well as between Japan and Europe. Trump administration tries to also break the security ties between Europe and Indo-Pacific area by trying to convince the European and Asian allies to take responsibility for their own regional security. This strategy is even ideal for China and Russia, whose long-term objective was to create a division between Europe and US and also between Japan and Europe. In addition, although their security interests are divergent in certain areas, China and Russia coordinate their policies in various fields in order to achieve their security interests in Europe and Asia through a strategic partnership which has no restrictions. Therefore, European allies in Europe and Indo-Pacific should strengthen their relationship with the US and should intensify cooperation in these areas. At the same time, the US withdraws from a free international or liberal international order, and China and Russia try to fill the resulting void. That is why democratic countries in Europe and Indo-Pacific should cooperate in order to maintain the law-based international order and in order to consolidate cooperation with the global South. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Mutsushika.
Presentation, I think this round of applause says something about the message you have delivered right now. I want to go now to Paul COYER because he's a great strategist in security, defense, and foreign affairs relations, and he's well connected also to the US administration. And after this presentation from Professor Mutsushika, we really need to know the point of view from Washington. Paul COYER, please.
Thank you. I'm not going to address everything that the professor said because it would take too much time, and I've got my own points to make. But in short, I think he displays a bit of a misunderstanding of the Trump administration. So again, you judged his position does, so I can respond directly to him. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to address maybe some of what he said. One of the questions I want to discuss is how the world is going to evolve in 2026. And of course, that is going to be shaped heavily by transatlantic relations, by the Trump administration's attitude toward world order. One thing I do have to say is the misunderstanding that the Trump administration is somehow abandoning a rules-based order. I'm not sure where that comes from. That is not what's happening. There is going to be a continuous shift to multipolarity. That much is obvious. I'm a historian. The global tectonic plates geopolitically are shifting very rapidly underneath our feet for structural issues, for structural reasons, and they're going to continue to. And so one of the things that I stated in Romanian Parliament in late April when I first came here this year was that Romania has a strategic culture and the history and the capability of charting its own course on the global stage, and that I think that it should. One reason why Romania is geopolitically important is because of its Black Sea positioning. That's going to be a continuing hotspot around the world. Obviously, that impinges on world food supply, on a lot of things that are in the interest of the United States to make sure that the Black Sea is peaceful, that there's free flow of shipping. And the Black Sea traditionally has not had a lot of attention by American policymakers. I think that is changing, at least for right now. The Trump administration realizes how important it is. But in the coming year, getting back to major trends, we have the shift to multipolarity. We have a changing transatlantic relationship. I have to kind of shape how this room is approaching this issue and thinking about it. The Trump administration is insisting that Europe be a strong partner. It doesn't want Europe to be weak. It's quite the opposite. It has been saying under President Trump for a long time that it wants Europe to carry more of its own water. And this is not unique to President Trump. I wrote an article for a French geopolitical journal in 2019 during Trump's first term, where I trace the history of American governmental attitudes towards NATO and toward our European allies from Dwight Eisenhower in 1953 till today. Dwight Eisenhower said things about Europe that you couldn't even print. He was frustrated with how they were not carrying any share of the burden. Now, in 1953, Europe was still pulling itself out from underneath the devastation of World War II. It was more understandable. But as you go decade by decade, every American president, Democrat and Republican, every American defense secretary, most of our senior generals and many other senior officials in Congress and elsewhere have had the exact same attitude. In fact, Mike Mansfield, the Democrat Senate Majority Leader in the 1960s and 70s, in the middle of the Vietnam War, in the early 70s, submitted, I think, 3 different legislative proposals to the United States Congress asking that we pull all of our troops out of Europe because he was so frustrated that Europe wasn't carrying any of the burden. So what Trump is doing, first of all, is not unique in criticizing Europe for that. It is firmly within the American tradition and sense of frustration about a lack of burden sharing. What Trump is hoping to do is get, as I said, Europe to be a more equal partner. He wants Europe to be strong because it's an American interest for Europe to be strong. We need a strong partner, not a weak partner. We need a partner that can carry its own water on its own continent. So while, yes, as the professor said, the United States does want our partners in certain regions to carry more weight of the burden of stability in that region, that does not necessarily follow that we do not want Europe to be involved in the Indo-Pacific. Because of the lack of about 35 years, ever since the end of the Cold War, of investment on the part of Europeans in their own security, there's a yawning gap in their capabilities that covers, where the United States covers 80 to 90% of the capabilities in certain areas, such as ISR, internet surveillance and reconnaissance, strategic airlift, refueling, electronic warfare, relying heavily on American satellites, aircraft, and industrial capacity, creating vulnerabilities despite European increased defense spending since 2020. So this reliance extends to logistics, munitions such as missiles, specialized enablers, and many other areas, making European forces less self-sufficient, especially for rapid, large-scale operations, which they simply don't have the capacity to undertake. We would like to see them have the capacity to undertake that. The White House message on Europe, I think right now is, no matter what occurs in Ukraine, the Europeans need to get basically on the ball now in terms of providing more seriously for their own security. There is frustration in the White House that Trump, starting 9 years ago, told Europe they needed to do this, and he was not received well, and they didn't listen, quite frankly. Now, contingencies in Ukraine and the war in Ukraine have caused Europe to realize how serious the situation is. I remember President Trump in 2017 went to Germany and told them that they should not be so dependent upon Russian energy. And I remember he was laughed at. Now we're taking that a bit more seriously, but I have to say we need to acknowledge that he was right. So there's a number of areas where the White House is a bit frustrated because they started 9 years ago hitting on these issues, and if these issues had been taken more seriously by Europe at the time, we may not be in this situation now. Another part of the White House message I want to emphasize is that, regarding Europe, is that we will be with you. So abandonment is not the issue. We will be with you, but we will no longer do it for you. That's a big distinction, an important distinction that needs to be made. Because the sense in the United States is, not just among the Trump administration, but among the American populace as a whole, is that, that the Europeans want us to do it for them. So that needs to be emphasized. Now, transatlantic relations, especially with Western Europe, the Trump administration in the national security strategy, just like Vice President Vance raised the issue in the Munich Security Forum, it's the issue of shared values, which I've heard talked about over the last couple of days, are indeed important. That underpins our alliance. But shared values have to be embodied by protections of certain human rights that should be sacrosanct. And the Trump administration has pointed out that freedom of speech, as just one example of many, has been under sustained assault in Germany and France and Britain and other places like that. That's just true. You can debate that, but the numbers don't lie. I think in Germany, under paragraph 188 of their law code, in 2024, 10,732, I think is the number, people who were arrested and or indicted or charged with free speech crimes, basically, for posting wrong things on Facebook. That, to the average American viewer, is a bit dystopian. And that's something that is of concern. So that's why it was raised in the national security strategy. I don't want to talk any further on those sorts of issues. I want to pivot just for a second on the Black Sea region, because that's so critical to what's happening here and in the Ukraine. The Black Sea region is critical. Everyone here understands that. Washington, as I talked about at the beginning of my comments, has over the decades probably not taken that as a high priority as they should have. In the American strategic mindset, the Black Sea is kind of in the lower right-hand corner, and I mean that literally, but also in terms of a mental map of how we think about the important areas of conflict around the world. It should be a higher priority. It's becoming that now. I think that some people tend to think that since Ukraine has had such a positive impact on devastating the Russian Black Sea fleet, which we all applauded, that the Russians are really toothless in the Black Sea, and that is just not the case. So we need to continue to take that threat seriously. They still occupy Crimea, which, as we all know, is a projection point from which they can really project power in the Black Sea. They can continue to create instability and insecurity there, which impacts on shipping of food products and everything else across the Black Sea. So we need to make sure that's addressed. And Romania, Bulgaria, and Turkey all play a major role in that. Romania especially, given the fact that Odessa, which clearly needs to stay in Ukrainian hands, shipping that comes out of that comes past the Romanian coast. So we need Romania to be a strong partner in that regard. I could go on, but I think we'll stop there for now.
Well, Paul Chair, Professor Chair, thank you so much for your words. And I want to give the floor to Nico LANGE, the senior fellow of Munich Security Conference. Nico, we had great and let's say strong words from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte last night in Munich, and probably he wants to open our eyes for 2026. What's your opinion?
Thank you for the kind invitation and the possibility to share a few thoughts. Before I just have a few points I want to share, but before I do that, just to react on what we heard as the perspective from Washington. We keep hearing that President Trump is frustrated about this and frustrated about that, and I can assure you the frustration is there on the other side as well. And I can only state there is no issue with free speech in Europe. If the European Union decides to regulate digital platforms from the United States of America, then that is an expression of European sovereignty. And we are at a point where I think we should be very honest with each other, because it's ridiculous if the United States, together with Kirill Dmitriev, are expressing their concern about the limitation of free speech in Europe, and if the national security strategy from the White House, which is not an operational document, we know all that, it's just a manifesto or a talk to yourselves, is expressing that the European Union is kind of an enemy, while at the same time, the Russian approach to this is to see European cohesion as the goal of Russian warfare. And I think there needs to be pushback from the European side on this, and maybe the pushback will help, that's maybe where we meet, the pushback will help to come out of the daddy modus and to be perceived as Europeans as an equal partner, because we are not a subordinate or an employee of the United States of America. And I think it was a mistake by the Europeans, and that's how I segue into the topic of Ukraine. It was a mistake for the last year that the Europeans had their best approach to Ukraine to talk among themselves, and then when they had talked among themselves enough to pick up the phone and then to call daddy. Because we know it will not solve things. And my first point on rebuilding Ukraine is, to rebuild Ukraine, we have to win the war first. And I am convinced that the attempts to push Ukraine and Europe aside with so-called peace deals that are just an attempt to force Ukraine into accepting the terms of Russia, just to keep this out of the way, to start some form of normalization between the US and Russia, will not bring peace and will not bring rebuilding to Ukraine. It will bring circles, as we have seen now, the Europeans running to the rescue to prevent Ukraine to be pushed into Russian terms. But my main point is, I don't think President Trump can deliver Putin. Even if this new plan will be agreed to, that we heard from our colleague from Japan, Putin will say, oh, that's fine, but there's a little nuance, and the nuance is, I want a totally different order in Europe. It will not lead to a ceasefire, it will not lead to peace, and my fundamental point on this, it will be the Europeans who need to push Putin to peace. The United States of America have made clear they do not want to pressure Putin. They always want to pressure the victim of the aggression to agree to Putin's terms, and this will not solve the issue. The second point I want to make is, unfortunately, because of that, 2026 will continue to be a year of war. And the main task for the Europeans here is to stabilize Ukraine and to give Ukraine the tools to put Putin under pressure. There are more elements of pressure, but the warfare in Ukraine is one of the main elements, where the Europeans already now are doing much more than everybody else, where the Europeans are paying for all the equipment, weapons, ammunition, including from the United States of America since July, that are going into Ukraine. But the Europeans have the approach of just helping Ukraine so that Ukraine can sustain, but sustaining is not enough. There needs to be an element of pressure to Vladimir Putin. And there, I think I agree, the Europeans can do more, apart from sustaining Ukraine and helping Ukraine with the military tools necessary. I think Ukraine has more tools in its arsenal that need to be used. Stopping the shadow fleet in the Baltic Sea and in the Black Sea. Taking hands, I hope it will work out until the end of the year, on the Russian assets that are lying in Europe, to use them for European security, and building a logic of European strength into this, so that from a position of strength in some period of time, maybe in 2026, the Europeans can start talking themselves about European security, including Vladimir Putin. Donald Trump will not solve European security for the Europeans, and I think it's naive to believe that Daddy will talk to Putin and this will solve our security issues in Europe. That's not going to happen. And my last point, because it was mentioned by the State Secretary before, I very much agree that for Romania and for this region and for the security here, it will be necessary to use the focus of the NATO summit in 2026 in Turkey to put a focus into this region. Not only because for any post-ceasefire arrangement, maritime surveillance where Turkey, Romania and other Black Sea coastal countries need to play an important role will be key to preserving peace after a ceasefire in Ukraine, but also because the changing position of the United States of America will require Romania to force the European NATO partners to put more attention and more posture into the southeastern flank of NATO. I very much agree. It is the Europeans who need to take care of this. We will not be able to rely only on the idea that the United States will come to the rescue. I think the national security strategy and the first elements we heard about a possible force posture review of the US is already pointing into the direction that we need European force posture to replace what is maybe not there anymore from the United States side. And that includes, and I will finish with that, we could call it an orderly divorce, avoiding a messy divorce, investing the money that we have in Europe right now for defense spending into strategic enablers. I think that's absolutely right. It's not only about building European defense on the basis of the existing NATO planning where the United States are the strategic enabler backbone. It is building European strategic enablers ourselves, including satellite capabilities that you mentioned, to be able to act as Europeans, even in cases when the United States of America are not willing to act together with us. And I think we should not downplay or calm ourselves down about Trump not meaning it that way, or the national security strategy not be meant that way. It's an attack on European cohesion. It's an attempt to create a world where the strong are pushing the weak, and the weak have to live with what the strong are deciding. And I think a European answer to this needs to be developed in 2026 on Ukraine, on European security, and then maybe not talking to daddy, but talking among equals with the United States of America.
Nico Lange, thank you so much for your words. I want to give the floor right now to Vadym HALAICHUK because intentionally I did it to you and Ukraine to have the last words after we saw all those presentations. Excellent views from Asia, from Europe, from Washington, and from Bucharest. I will kindly remind that the title of this forum is Rebuilding Ukraine. And right now we see that probably we have also to rebuild the relation between United States and Europe. So if Ukraine will still be our first objective, first of all, ceasefire, second, just peace, and after that, rebuilding Ukraine, then I think we are very keen to keep our engagements about what will happen in the eastern flank of NATO, and Ukraine will be our partner, and I hope it will join very soon the European Union. Vadym, you have the floor.
Radu, thank you. Thank you, George, and the New Strategy Center for organizing this event and bringing so many very interesting speakers. We had great exchange on our panel, which is very indicative of how difficult the issues of finding the consensus are, and how important it is that we talk to each other. Rebuilding Ukraine is something that cannot wait until the war is over, until the ceasefire is reached and then stable peace is there, because we need to do rebuilding as we fight the war. That's the challenge. A lot was said about it. There were very interesting ideas, even on this, during this forum, on how to approach it and how to do it best. And it's very encouraging for me personally that people understand that we do need to do the rebuilding already, and we are, by the way, doing it, and fairly successfully in many domains. Now, in terms of our expectations in Ukraine, we are very hopeful that our partners, and Ukraine considers its strategy to join the Euro-Atlantic alliances as the strategy that we will follow, and the strategy that our partners do accept as the way out. In order to understand why we require that very clear approach towards the Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine, we need to remember what Putin was saying. He was giving these lectures about history, not because he's a historian. He actually has pretty weird interpretations of the history. He was sending a signal. Russia, ever since its creation, had this idea that it was a God-given mission to Russia to rule over this part of the world, to liberate the Slavic people, and so on and so forth. They still live in that paradigm. Putin's not fighting for a particular piece of land. He is fighting for the land that will provide him with the opportunities that could be used as a springboard for attack. That happened in Crimea back in 2014, when the war actually started, and when the world didn't react and gave the encouragement, gave the approval, basically, for Putin to continue. This is how he sees that mission. He will continue for as long as he's allowed to continue. Therefore, for us in Ukraine, it's very clear that the only way to stop this would be to stop him. He will stop where he will be stopped, not because he will get some sort of security assurances, as they demand that Russia needs also security assurances from EU and US, not because there will be great economic benefits, he will stop because he will not be continued. And it's not that hard to achieve, I put it that way. We had very good news yesterday from Lviv, where ministers of foreign and European affairs met to discuss extremely important issue for Ukraine. Ukraine's integration into EU, start of accession talks. We all know Hungary is blocking the formal start of accession talks, and it was the idea of Danish presidency to do the front loading, sort of let's do whatever it is we would be doing if we have formally started the accession negotiations. Well, yesterday we had a very good decision in that regard, where EU, the Commission, presented the negotiating positions. Ukraine presented its own negotiating positions on the 3 chapters that we have agreed upon earlier. So that's pretty much a start of the negotiation process. This is pretty much the event that marks the ability of EU to deliver, which many doubted. Ever since Hungary used the veto vote, a lot of people, well, in Ukraine and around the world were in very deep doubts about the ability of EU to deliver. We still have that problem, we still have that issue, but we have at least shown the resolve and creative way of going around it. And by the way, Hungary was present there, only ambassador of Hungary, but still, it was a very, very interesting way of Hungary to participate, to put it in that event. So there, we also made a good plan on how we move on in 26, what it is that Ukraine needs to do, its reforms, and what it is that EU will be doing to deliver. And to make it short, technically, we can work in this mode until things change and until Hungary or any other country stops blocking the process. And by that time, we hope that we will have done everything necessary to maybe even open up and close the chapter simultaneously and finalize the accession talks and move on with that process. So here on the EU integration side, we're good, and it's extremely important. Though formally Russia hasn't been issuing any demands on Ukraine's EU integration, we know very well that this issue of Ukraine becoming part of EU, of Euro-Atlantic space, is exactly the reason for the war. We all remember Maidan in 2014, started, and it was called the Revolution of Dignity, the Euromaidan, started because Yanukovych, under the pressure from Putin, refused to sign the accession, the association agreement with the European Union. This is the main reason. This is the threat that Putin feels. If Ukraine goes that way, shows that example of actually Ukraine, you know, that they don't even, the Russians don't even think it's a country, would show an example of successful reforms, of successful democratic transformation. That's a very dangerous example for other countries of the former Soviet Union and for Russian people themselves. So they do feel threatened by that, and it's important for us to remember it and to show the resolve that we have. Now, in terms of our expectations for the 2026, we're going to fight. We're going to fight no matter what. There's no other way. I personally do not believe in any solutions anytime soon, because there's just no willingness in Kremlin, there's just no willingness from Putin that he demonstrated to end this war. We see just the opposite. The war may change, the way the war is fought. Wars go in cycles. We're now entering the so-called winter cycle of the war, and by the way, we expect some changes in terms of the Russian ability to progress on the battlefield. That, of course, can be achieved only with help from our allies. But again, that's our main focus. Hold the battlefield, hold the fight, and hold the country internally, again, to demonstrate to Putin that his pressure will not have the effect that is intended. And so far, what he intends, what he's calling the negotiations, is not negotiations. They're not negotiating. They presented their demands for Ukraine to surrender, and they're expecting us to accept the demands. It's not negotiations. He's not even close to presenting his real negotiation positions. Therefore, we have made it clear that the position that we have formed together with our allies, and it's a common European Union and Ukraine's and other allies' position, also made very clear where our red lines are and what we are prepared to negotiate. So for us now, it's achieving this understanding foremost and most importantly with the United States, our biggest allies and most important ally, on why we need to go into the negotiations on the positions that we have formed and not on the demands that Russia has presented, because otherwise we will not have any prospect of peace. Best case scenario, short ceasefire, and the demands that Putin has made recently about the elections in Ukraine and very soon. Well, President Zelensky made it clear. Of course, we're a democratic country. We need elections. We want to have elections. Let's talk about how we can do the elections. But what we understand is the real intention in Russia is to send us into the election mode, and elections in Ukraine. We love elections, by the way. Ukrainians love elections. Those are very contested. Those are very tense events where we will be weakened internally so that Russia could take the advantage of that process. That is very clear to us. That is very clear to our European partners. And we hope that we've made a good case, making it as clear to the United States and of course to the Russians that we're not going to fall for a ceasefire arrangement for that to be used by Russia to weaken us and to promote its own cause. Therefore, that's our expectations for the 2026. Europe has shown that we can do things. It's amazing what you can do when you have to. And next big issue that we also expect to resolve somehow the Council next week, and the issue of financing Ukraine, hopefully using the Russian frozen assets or whatever other methods and ways would be found. That again will demonstrate the common position, the resolve, and send a clear message to Putin. You have to get real about those proposals for negotiations, then we will negotiate for serious. That would be it for me. Thank you.
Vadym, HALAICHUK, thank you so much for this great review from Kyiv. I would like to ask the panelists a question, and we only have 7 minutes left, so I will please ask you to have a very short answer. What is your main concern when we are talking about security in 2026? Professor MUTSUSHIKA.
Eu sunt complet de acord.
I totally agree with you, Vadym. I partly agree with you, Mr. COYER. The American peace is almost over. Our American contribution is almost over. Europe needs to strengthen its defense power and And you are right. And our Prime Minister Takaichi said, although we were attacked that we were just militating, as always. Mr. Trump always criticizes the fact that the alliance between Japan and the US is in favor only of Japan, and the US has only responsibilities, only obligations to defend and maintain security in Japan. But our Prime Minister said that if conditions are met, the Japanese government is willing to support the US Army. We want to be equal contributors. This is an erroneous propaganda. Thank you.
Well, if I have to name one, then my main concern is that Putin might expand the war in 2026 into more European countries apart from Ukraine. And everybody has been, for quite a while, it has been a topic at conferences, oh, Article 5 will be tested, will be tested, will be tested. But for now, even when 19 decoy drones are flying into Polish airspace, we are not sending a message of deterrence to the Russian side. And I'm afraid that there is some encouragement, always invitation to Russia at the moment to try something. That is my main concern.
Professor Paul COYER.
Yeah, I mean, encouragement, I'm not sure who you think is encouraging them, but certainly not the United States. I think if I had to limit it to one certain issue, and there's a lot of issues that are going to shape 2026, it's that if we do not end the war soon, the impact on European stability and security can go very, very bad very quickly. History shows that wars and conflicts can metastasize very quickly beyond the regional. We do not, the last thing we want is for this conflict, which right now is still regional, to become a global conflict. We do not want millions of people to die. We do not want any more people to die, no more Ukrainians, no more Russians. So we really need the war to end, and for that, unfortunately, painful compromises have to be made. When you're an adult in diplomacy, you have to sit down on the other side of adults with whom you vehemently hang on, let me finish. You've made your point. No, it's not. When you're adult in diplomacy, as I started to say, you've got to sit down with people with whom you vehemently disagree and come to an agreement so that you don't come to a major cataclysmic conflict. And that's the thing that we need to keep in mind as we approach this coming year.
Thank you. State Secretary Moldovan, what is your main concern on security in 2026?
Îngrijorarea mea este că acest război va
My worry is that this war will continue. Russia will try to take advantage of the new policy the US is leading in Europe, and as Secretary General Mark Rutte stated yesterday in his speech, not all countries understand the danger we are facing today. We do, because we are at the border with the war. We are in its doorsteps, but not all countries acknowledge that. More countries should acknowledge that. Our European partners should do that, and our partners within the alliance should understand that, and we should work harder for that.
Our main concern is that the problem that we had, the assistance that's been coming too little, too late, the functions that were provided, that provided time for Russia to adapt and so on and so forth, will push us towards the those circumstances where Ukraine will be sort of forced into accepting some sort of very poor arrangement with a ceasefire, which will result in a disaster later on. Nowadays, every fourth prisoner of war that we take on the battlefield is from the occupied territories. Russia is using occupied territories as the resource, economical, human, and so on and so forth. The more land they grab, the more resource, and it's going to be used to further attack Europe, to further promote this Russian ideology about their God-given right to rule over a certain portion of the European territories. So here we are very worried about some of the messages that we hear on the need to sit down and get serious about finishing it, just ending it. Unfortunately, it won't produce stable peace if we just do it that way.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our panel. I want you to ask a round of applause for the great panelists we had today. In 10 minutes, we'll have the next panel. There's a short pause, so please enjoy and be back in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.